Under the coup in 2021, the military junta has been committing serious human rights violations against the people. Recently, during the 53rd regular sessions of the Human Rights Council, the United Nations High Commissioners and Special Rapporteur presented their report, highlighting the gravity of the situation and called upon the UN Security Council to refer the crimes committed by the junta to the International Criminal Court, ICC. Today, we are honored to have Mr. Ton Andrew, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situations of the human rights in Myanmar. Now he is joining us on the show. Welcome, Mr. Ton.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
First of all, I would like to ask about the report that you recently submitted on your report, and you point out the human rights violation committed by the military junta. But in this time, I feel like you express more seriously why and how it is important.
Well, it's critically important because things continue to deteriorate in Myanmar. And my message to the international community in general and the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly in particular is that if we're going to, if this is unacceptable, which it should be, if the human rights violations, the crimes against humanity, the war crimes that are being committed against the people of Myanmar, if this is unacceptable, then we need to change course. We need to assess what the international community has been doing, the impact of that or the failure to make an impact, and then make an appropriate change. I released a report last year on the impact of the coup on children in Myanmar. And I told the Human Rights Council at that time that unless a change was made, these horrific conditions facing Myanmar's children were going to continue, and that we were faced with the prospect of a lost generation in Myanmar. Well, it turns out that as of the end of last year, more than 800 children have been killed or maimed in Myanmar. 387 children are now being held behind bars as political prisoners in Myanmar. And 51 children are being held as hostages by the junta as leverage to get to their families, to force their families to give themselves up. I mean, this is just absolutely horrific. And you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children who have been displaced, millions of children who are in need of humanitarian assistance. So this is a disaster that continues to get worse, and it is unconscionable for the world to stand by and watch as this happens without reassessing the role that we are playing as an international community and taking new action that could change this horrible, horrible trajectory.
ASEAN foreign minister meeting and just finished, and so I would like to ask related to the ASEAN, because you also talk about the ASEAN during the regular session, and you highlight that some countries are already to move on and to accept the junta to legitimate claim to power. So, for instance, ASEAN principles are being challenged by some regional government, and they have already engaged with the junta as a legitimate government. So, how dangerous it is this situation for the people of Myanmar?
It's very dangerous, and we should be going in precisely the opposite direction. Last year, the president of Indonesia indicated that he believed that there should be stronger pressure applied on the junta, that there should be fewer opportunities for the junta to participate in ASEAN functions beyond just the prime minister and the foreign minister level, but other levels, in recognition of the failure of the junta to respect and stand by its own commitments, starting with the 5-point consensus, the first point of which, of course, is the cessation of violence. So this is horrific that they continue to violate their commitments. The consequence of that failure And now you have some countries who want to say, okay, let's just turn the page. Let's treat this junta as if it's a legitimate government. And then let's just kind of move on as if nothing has happened, as if there are no human rights violations or crimes against humanity. Let me be very clear. The junta should not be serving in positions of authority or recognized as anything other than they are within ASEAN. They should be serving prison time for their crimes that they have committed against the people of Myanmar. That's what they should be serving. And moving in the direction of accepting them is not only a violation of the fundamental principles of the United Nations of human rights, of basic dignity and decency, but it's an assault to every man, woman, and child in Myanmar. We should be doing exactly the opposite of accepting the junta as anything other than what they are. Which, by the way, in my view, in meeting with member states about this question, I said, it might be more useful to think about the junta not as a government, but as a criminal gang. They've taken 54 million people hostage. They're stealing the natural resources, the money, the assets of a people, and they're using it to attack and kill the people of Myanmar and to enrich themselves. I mean, this is a criminal activity. And so I think it's important to recognize the junta for what it is and not in any way move in a direction of legitimizing this very, very illegitimate entity.
You also mentioned that some country, some entities operating in Singapore have shipped 254 million worth of trade in arms and unrelated materials to the military. So you also stated that you discussed with the Singapore government official about that. So could you please elaborate in the situations and further development?
Yes, I published a report, actually now two reports on the weapons that are being transferred into the hands of the junta that is enabling it to commit these atrocities. I mean, the problem, the biggest problem with that is that these transfers are occurring with the full knowledge that these weapons are being used to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this is, in my view, unconscionable, and we need to stop it. And the first step to stopping it is to exposing it. And the report I released last month is entitled The Billion-Dollar Death Trade, which documents how over $1 billion in weapons have been transferred to the junta since the coup, with a full knowledge of how these weapons are going to be used. And I identify the countries specifically that are engaged in these transfers. And you mentioned Singapore. Singapore was, of the 5 principal countries identified in the report, Singapore was number 3 at $254 million. And there was no evidence that the government of Singapore was engaged in these transactions or even aware of these transactions. And so I presented this report, and then I presented, even before the report, I presented my findings to the Singapore government. The Singapore government said that they were very concerned about this. They've launched an investigation based upon my findings. I subsequently met with many officials in some of these key ministries that are involved in this investigation in Singapore, provided them with additional information, detailed information that I'm not going to release publicly because we want to make sure that our sources are protected. But we want I certainly want to do everything possible to provide Singapore with all the information that they need to conduct this investigation and to stop this. So yes, Singapore, you're exactly right, $254 million worth of weapons transferred through 138 entities based in Singapore involved in this weapons trade, and so we're trying to stop that.
And your earlier report, which was published in May 2023, and you disclosed that the Myanmar military has imported at least $1 billion in arms and raw materials in the coup. According to these data, the Singapore is that on the list behind Russia and China, and followed by India and Thailand. So it is possible to be with those other countries apart from Singapore, and what is the best way to stop them?
Well, I think that number one is to expose this, and first of all, just to be clear, the materials that I included in this report are not necessarily just weapons, but they're also dual-use technology and weapons-related materials that we know are being shipped into Myanmar to supply factories within Myanmar that are making munitions. So it covers that full range of resources that are being used, either weapons themselves or weapons technology or raw materials that are then being used to manufacture weapons. But the first step is to expose this, which is what the purpose of my report was. Secondly, lay it out before the United Nations, lay it out before the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and then to call for action, to call for this to stop. Now, it's controversial. I'm fully aware of that. China criticized me in the Human Rights Council. I've been criticized by the Chinese government as how they framed it as vilifying normal arms trade. And they've also accused me of exceeding my mandate, that this is not within my jurisdiction. And with all due respect, what I'm vilifying is the use of weapons and weapons technology to kill innocent people, and the transfer of weapons into the hands of killers that we know are using these weapons to commit atrocities. That's what I'm vilifying. And in terms of my mandate, not only is I do three things basically. I report on human rights violations. I then analyze them, why and how these human rights violations are occurring. And then thirdly, I make recommendations of what can be done about them. I think that those two elements, analyzing them, identifying how these are happening, and then what the international community should do, these are fundamental pieces of my mandate, in my view. It's also my moral responsibility to be providing the international community in the UN, not just with reports of how horrible things are. Not just a report on how horrible things are within Myanmar in terms of human rights violations, but why they're occurring, how they're occurring, and what we can be doing about them. And that raises controversy. I recognize that. I accept it. But with all due respect to China, I'm going to continue this work.
So on that session, you also requested to the United States to please join EU because EU has already sanctions to MOGE, but up to now, US does not impose any sanction to MOGE. So how do then why the US government delayed to sanction on MOGE?
Well, you're right. Those are the three things that enable the junta to continue its atrocities: money, weapons, and legitimacy. And the single largest source of money for the junta is Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, at least $1.5 billion per year. So we need to stop that. And the EU has established sanctions. I'm encouraging the United States to follow suit. I'm also encouraging the EU, the UK, Canada, and others to follow the US lead. The US has recently established sanctions on Myanmar Foreign Trade Bank and the Myanmar Investment and Commercial Bank. This is an extremely important step in the right direction because it's going to tie up their ability to purchase these weapons and have access to currency that they're using in these international transactions. This is very important. What I'm encouraging the US, the EU, UK, Canada, and others to do is to coordinate these actions. The US should be sanctioning Mogi. The EU should be sanctioning Myanmar Foreign Trade Bank. All of those who support human rights in Myanmar should be establishing a strategic approach in which the various pieces of actions taken by member states can add up to a coherent and powerful whole. This is not happening, at least to the degree that it needs to be. There's been now the announcement of some people who have been assigned by some of these governments, including the US and the EU, to discuss how they might work better together. That's a step in the right direction. But ultimately, we need to have all of these entities, the working together. The problem here is that the United Nations Security Council could be doing this through exercising its Chapter 7 authority, including sanctions, including arms embargo, including referring the junta to the International Criminal Court. I mean, that's what should be happening. But we know it's not going to happen, given the makeup of the Security Council. So therefore, what those countries who support human rights and support the people of Myanmar, what they should be doing is working together, coordinating themselves together so that they work in a strategic whole. This is not rocket science. This has been done in other crises. Ukraine comes to mind as an example. Security Council did not pass a resolution with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but nonetheless, nations joined together to support the people of Ukraine. And just by the way, if I could just say that, I all the people, and I have a lot of conversations with people inside of the country, the people of Myanmar support the people of Ukraine. They are very sympathetic to the people of Ukraine. And of course, the junta is very close to the Russian regime. But as much as they support the people of Ukraine and are sympathetic to the people of Ukraine, people ask me from within Myanmar, okay, well, what about us? I mean, why is it that the international community has been so focused, so coordinated, so directed at defending a people under assault in the case of Ukraine, but not in the case of Myanmar? I made this point. I've made this point to several countries, including the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. And I had an ambassador say to me, "Well, it's different." He says, in the case of Ukraine, you have a sovereign country attacking and violating the sovereignty of another country. It was a basic violation of the UN Charter. And I said, well, I understand that, but that distinction is lost on the people of Myanmar, who are under assault themselves by a brutal military. As a matter of fact, the very same types of weapons, bombs that are falling on communities in Ukraine, are falling on communities in Myanmar. So it's a distinction without a difference as far as the people of Myanmar is concerned. And I think it's important for the United Nations and at least the member states who support human rights to work in a more coordinated fashion with respect to the people of Myanmar.
On that day, during the 53rd regular sessions of the Human Rights Council, and the United Nations High Commissioner also called upon the UN Security Council to refer the crime committed by the junta to ICC. So would that be possible?
Frankly, no. It should happen. By rights, it should happen. I think we need to continue to call for this action to occur. But it's not going to. Given the makeup of the Security Council, it's not going to. Which means that we need to be doubling our efforts to coordinate our opposition to this regime and pressure on the regime. certainly we need to be opposing any steps to go in the opposite direction, any steps to legitimize the regime. We need to be doing everything possible to stop that.
But one thing is, the United Kingdom also did assume the presidency of the UN Security Council in this month, and also the United States will be the next month. So there is the hope for the positive outcome to emerge with the two this 2-month period. Can you anticipate any significant development during this time?
I can't anticipate any significant developments. I certainly can hope for significant developments. I certainly think that the conditions in Myanmar warrant action by the Security Council. I'm hoping that this will be at least taken up in some fashion by the Security Council, that they'll pay attention to these deteriorating conditions, and that they my preference would be that there be a vote on the Security Council on an action resolution to address this crisis, including sanctions, arms embargo, reference to the International Criminal Court. And I know that that's controversial. They say, well, it will never happen. We know that it will be vetoed. But my view is, look, okay, fine. If it's vetoed, it's vetoed. But at least there's an open debate. Everyone gets their chance to lay their case before the Security Council and the world, and then votes are taken, and people can be held accountable for their votes, for their decision. It's fully in the open. It's out before the full public scrutiny. That is not going to happen, at least in the short run. But I think we need to continue to be calling for that to happen. And while we wait for action, I hope that the Security Council will at least put the spotlight on this issue, continue to put the spotlight on this issue, and that countries who support human rights and the people of Myanmar work in a more coordinated and strategic fashion together.
My last question, going back to the OFAC sanction, to what extent does the recent OFAC sanction impact the region, and what specific consequences can be anticipated for the region as a result?
I think that there's some real prospects here. I have some high hopes that this is going to make could make a significant difference in hindering the ability of the junta to get access to the revenue and the weapons that it needs to continue these atrocities. This is a very important development. And there's two things that have to happen. One, it has to be enforced. It has to be strictly implemented. That those who are involved in the network that's engaged in these financial transactions, they have to be fully engaged. Sanctions without enforcement are not sanctions. So I am calling for strict and very aggressive implementation of these sanctions. And then the second important step is that we need to broaden these sanctions. We need to get additional countries involved in stopping the flow of revenue into the pockets of the junta through these steps. So I'm encouraged by this, and we'll be working very, very hard to make sure that these are implemented as aggressively and forcefully as possible.
Thank you, Tom. That's all for today. Yeah. I believe you have been working tirelessly for our country. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's my honor.
My honor. Yeah.
Thank you so much for